I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the small mountain town I needed to visit for work. It was an old single-story house on the edge of the woods, nothing fancy, but the photos looked clean enough. The host had dozens of reviews saying the place was quiet, private, and simple. That was all I needed. I had been traveling for weeks, and I just wanted a few nights of sleep without hearing traffic or hotel doors slamming at all hours. I arrived in the late afternoon. The area felt too quiet the moment I stepped out of my car. The house sat down a gravel driveway surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The air smelled like wet leaves and something metallic, like rust. I remember thinking the place looked older than the photos showed. The paint on the door frame was peeling, and the window screens looked a little bent, like someone had grabbed them hard at some point. The lockbox stuck for a second, but I managed to get the key out. Inside, the house had that closed-up smell, like nobody had opened a window in months. The floor felt slightly uneven under my feet. There was a small living room with one couch that sloped downward on one side, a thin rug that curled at the edges, and a coffee table with faint rings where glasses had once been. The kitchen was clean enough, though the fridge hummed loudly like it was working too hard. The bedroom was tiny but okay. Just a bed, a side table, and a lamp that flickered for a few seconds after turning on. Nothing was wrong yet. Nothing obvious, at least. But from the moment I walked in, I had this subtle sense of being watched. Not through windows or cameras, but like the house itself was waiting for something. I tried to shake it off as travel fatigue. That first night, I lay in bed scrolling on my phone until past midnight. The woods outside were completely silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. That kind of silence feels loud after a while. When I finally turned off my phone, I noticed faint scratching somewhere in the walls. Not fast scratching like rats, but slow, careful movements. I told myself it was pipes settling or the old wooden structure shifting, but it kept happening at irregular intervals, almost like something adjusting its position. I barely slept. The next morning, I found the back door unlocked. I was sure I had locked it the night before, but I told myself maybe I had been half asleep and forgot. The handle felt slightly warm, like someone had just touched it. I checked the house, room by room, even though it made me feel paranoid. Everything was exactly where I had left it. During the day, things felt normal. I worked at a small cafe in town, answered emails, killed time. When I returned in the evening, the house felt colder than it should have been. Like someone had opened all the windows and then shut them 10 minutes before I arrived. Except the windows were still locked. That night, the sounds in the walls got louder. It wasn't scratches anymore. It was more like shifting weight, slight pressure, and something that made the drywall pop for a split second. I stayed completely still on the bed, hoping it would stop if I didn't move. The sound traveled, starting near the bathroom, then moving toward the living room, then to somewhere behind the bedroom wall. It stopped close to where my head was resting, just on the other side of the wall. The only thing separating me from it was a thin layer of paint and plaster. I barely slept again. On the third day, I noticed small changes. My suitcase had been moved an inch away from the wall. My phone charger was on the floor instead of on the nightstand. A small stack of folded towels in the bathroom was slightly tilted, like someone had picked them up and set them back down without lining the edges. None of these things were huge, but they were the kind of changes that only happen when someone is inside a home. I started paying closer attention to details. I noticed that the floor vent in the hallway near the bedroom looked newer than the others. Clean metal screws instead of rusted old ones. The vent cover was too clean, like it had been replaced recently, and the area around it looked like someone had wiped it down. I crouched to look through the slats. It was too dark to see anything, but the smell coming out of it wasn't normal dust. It smelled like sweat and old wood. That night, everything escalated. I had trouble falling asleep again, so I lay on the couch in the living room, hoping maybe a change of spot would help. The house groaned and clicked like old houses do. But then around 2 a.m., I heard a slow, deliberate thud behind the bedroom wall. Then another. Then a long, dragging sound, almost like heavy fabric being pulled across a wooden floor, except the sound was coming from inside the wall. I stayed frozen on the couch, staring at the dark hallway leading to the bedroom. My mouth was dry, My breathing felt too loud. I heard another sound. An unsteady exhale, muffled but definitely not the house settling. A real human exhale. It was followed by a faint rustling, then slow scraping, like fingertips brushing the inside of the drywall. I didn't move for at least 10 minutes. When the sound stopped, I quietly got up and grabbed my bag. I didn't even bother putting everything inside. I just shoved what I could into it. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped my car keys twice. I wanted to run straight to the car and leave right then, but I knew running on gravel would make noise. Before I left, I looked back at the house one last time. That's when I noticed something new. The hallway floor vent, the clean one, was slightly crooked, like it had been pushed from the inside. It wasn't like that earlier in the evening. The screws looked loose, and the metal was bent outward just enough to notice if you were looking closely. Someone had been using that vent, or moving through that space. I forced myself to walk calmly out the front door. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt the cold night air hit my face, and for a moment I felt safe enough to pick up my pace. I got in my car, locked the doors, and drove away without looking back. The house shrank in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness of the woods. I didn't stop driving until I reached the brightest gas station I could find 20 miles away. I sat in the car for a long time before I gathered the courage to call the police and report what happened. I told them I suspected someone was living inside the walls or crawl spaces of the Airbnb. They didn't act surprised. They asked for the address, told me to stay put, and said officers would check it out. Hours later, they called me back. They didn't give many details, but the officers said the crawl space and interior wall areas showed signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints, disturbed insulation, and small piles of crumbs and wrappers. He also said the vent near the bedroom had clearly been removed and reattached many times. They didn't find the person. Maybe he heard me leave. Maybe he slipped out into the woods through some other opening when the officers arrived. Maybe he had been watching me the entire time through cracks and vents, waiting for the right moment. I never went back to get the rest of my stuff. The Airbnb listing disappeared a few days later. And even now, every time I stay somewhere new, I check every vent, every crawl space, every panel of drywall. Because the worst part isn't that someone was living in that house. It's that he stayed completely silent for 2 nights, close enough to hear me breathe through the walls, before he finally decided to move. I booked the Airbnb because my best friend and I had been trying to get away from our usual routine. We both felt burned out. We wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere cheap, somewhere with space to breathe without people around. I found a small cabin listed in a rural area a few hours away from home. It looked clean in the pictures, simple, nothing fancy. It had 2 beds, a small kitchen, and a view of tall trees. The listing said it was isolated enough for peace, but still close enough to a gas station and a small town. That sounded perfect for a short trip. We arrived in the late afternoon. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that fills your chest with a heavy chill. The road leading to the cabin was narrow and covered in thin gravel. Trees surrounded everything. The cabin sat alone at the end of the road, with no other houses nearby. The only sign of life was a small mailbox that looked rusted and untouched. I didn't see any host or anyone watching from the main road. It already felt like we were too far from normal life, but we pushed that feeling aside. We unlocked the cabin using the key from the lockbox. Inside, the place looked older than the pictures had shown. The wooden floor had scratches all over it. The walls had tiny dents, like something had hit them many times over the years. The whole cabin smelled faintly like dust mixed with the cold air trapped inside. My friend placed our bags on the floor and started walking around slowly, checking each corner to see if everything worked. The kitchen had old metal cabinets, scratched pots, and a fridge that hummed louder than it should. The bathroom tiles were cracked near the edges. It all looked harmless, but it still made me feel like someone had lived there long before Airbnb existed. When I went to check the bedroom area, the temperature felt colder than the rest of the cabin. There were 2 single beds separated by a narrow walkway. The room felt unevenly cold, as if one side of the floor had something beneath it pulling the heat downward. My instinct felt off, but I kept telling myself I was just thinking too much because of how quiet everything was. We tried to relax. My friend lay on one bed scrolling through his phone while I unpacked a few clothes and placed them on the chair. The cabin kept making random sounds. Tiny knocks, slight shifts in the wood, and sudden clicks from the old heater. Each noise felt too sharp in a place this quiet. The deeper the evening got, the more the silence started to feel unnatural, as if something outside was listening. By the time darkness fully covered the woods, the air inside the cabin felt heavier. I kept noticing how the floor made soft, slow creaks even when neither of us moved. It sounded like weight settling, but the pattern was strange. Instead of one heavy creak, it was several small ones, almost like footsteps far away. I told myself it was just the old wood expanding from the heater turning on, but the heater barely worked. The warmth was uneven and weak. We didn't want to go outside again, so we stayed inside, trying to keep the lights on to make the place feel normal. But the lights didn't help. The shadows in the corners felt thicker than they should. The windows reflected only the inside of the cabin, making it feel boxed in. My friend lay down, staring at the ceiling, trying to distract himself from the growing tension in the room. As the night continued, the cabin started feeling colder. Not normal cold, these were sudden cold patches that appeared and disappeared. One moment the air around my face felt normal, and then a few seconds later it felt like someone had opened a freezer door beside me. The cold didn't match the weather outside. It felt too controlled, too directed. I tried to sleep, but each time I closed my eyes, a noise pulled me back awake. A faint scraping sound near the kitchen, a dull thud from the bathroom, a slow shift in the wooden wall behind my bed. I waited for the noises to settle, but they never fully stopped. Every sound had its own pause and pattern, like something was moving and stopping whenever we stirred. Sometime around midnight, the sounds changed. Instead of scattered noises, I noticed a slow rhythm forming, like something was moving around the cabin in a circle. A few soft steps on one side of the cabin, then silence. Then steps near the kitchen, then silence again. Then a light creak right outside the bedroom. I didn't move. My best friend didn't move either. I could hear his breathing growing shallow, and I knew he heard it too. The worst part was realizing that these sounds weren't coming from inside the walls or underneath the floors. They came from the actual cabin floor, the same one we were lying on. Something was walking slowly, dragging its weight carefully, pausing every few feet. Every step felt measured, almost cautious. For a moment, the cabin went completely still. No sounds, no cold patches, nothing. That silence crushed the room, making every second feel stretched out. I waited for something to break it. Then it did. A quiet exhale came from the bedroom doorway. It was so faint that if I had been moving even a little, I would have missed it. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the heater. It sounded like a person letting out a slow breath after holding it in. My whole body tensed. I didn't dare turn my head toward the doorway. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, trying to breathe lightly enough to not make a sound. My best friend didn't shift or make any noise. He stayed completely still too. We both knew something or someone was standing there, watching us. Not moving, not speaking, just breathing. The breathing stopped after a few seconds. Then the floor made one soft creak, and the cold air brushed the side of my face. It felt like someone walked past the bed very slowly. I could feel the weight change on the floor. I could sense the presence moving behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I pressed my hands against the blanket, trying not to tremble. After a long stretch of silence, I sensed the presence leave the bedroom. The floor creaked lightly as if something shifted its weight near the kitchen again. Then everything went still. We stayed frozen like that until I saw the faintest light of morning slip through the window. Once the outside turned from pitch black to a lighter gray, I sat up quickly. My friend sat up too, his eyes wide and tired. Neither of us said anything, but we didn't need to. We both felt the same fear crawling under our skin. We packed everything as fast as possible. I didn't care if things were folded or neat. My hands were shaking as I zipped the bags. I kept glancing toward the corners of the cabin, expecting something to shift. My friend avoided the bedroom doorway completely, walking around it like it still had something standing there. Outside, the air felt real again. For the first time since arriving, I could hear the distant wind and the sound of small animals in the woods. Normal sounds, the kind that should have been there the night before but weren't. The trees rustled softly. The sun, even though weak, made everything look less threatening. We threw our bags in the car and immediately drove away. As the cabin shrank in the rearview mirror, I felt a weight lift from my chest. My friend stared straight ahead, refusing to look back. We reached the main road and didn't talk. The road felt long, but each mile felt like we were escaping something that had been too close for comfort. When we finally reached town, everything felt normal again. Cars, people, voices, movement. All the things missing from the night before. A few hours later, after we were safely home, I checked the listing again. I noticed something I didn't catch before. Someone had left a short review months ago saying the cabin felt too quiet at night and that they heard strange movement inside the property. They didn't go into detail. They didn't mention anything specific. But now I understood exactly what they meant. The ending became clear to me then. The cabin wasn't empty. It never was. Something lived there or stayed there, something that moved at night and stayed out of sight. Someone who knew how to be silent, how to breathe softly, how to step carefully so guests wouldn't notice. But we noticed, and that was enough to make us leave before whatever was in there decided to get closer. We didn't see a face, and nothing touched us. But something walked around us, watched us, and breathed near us. Something real, something human, something alive. That's why the cabin felt wrong. It wasn't abandoned. It was occupied. And we were not the only ones inside it that night. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a quiet place to finish some work and clear my head. My apartment felt too cramped, and the city noise came straight through the walls. I wanted something simple, nothing fancy, just a clean place with a desk, a bed, and some privacy. The Airbnb listing looked perfect. Small guest house behind someone's main property, large yard, quiet neighborhood, and available immediately. The photos showed white walls, wood floors, a small kitchen, and a narrow bed that looked barely comfortable, but it didn't matter. I just needed somewhere peaceful for a few days, and it was cheap. The host messaged me only once with a short check-in code and instructions to go straight to the back unit because she wouldn't be home that afternoon. Everything seemed normal, almost too easy. When I arrived, the sun was still high, and the neighborhood looked peaceful. Wide lawns, trimmed bushes, no loud cars or people hanging around. The main house was bigger than it looked online, with old bricks, dark windows, and a long driveway that disappeared behind it. I parked and followed a stone path that curved around the side. The backyard felt much larger than what the pictures showed, with tall trees blocking the fence line and long patches of grass that looked like nobody had walked on them for days. The guest house sat in the far corner, a square building with faded paint, one small window, and a door that looked newer than everything else. It felt strange how quiet it was, even for a quiet neighborhood. No birds, no passing cars, no wind, nothing. Just heat and silence. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The place was exactly like the photos but smaller than expected. The walls were close, the air heavy, and I smelled something like damp cloth mixed with old wood. I told myself most cheap Airbnbs smelled weird. I dropped my backpack, put my laptop on the small desk, and opened the only window to let in some air. It didn't help much because the backyard air also smelled like soil that had been wet for days even though the weather had been dry. Still, I unpacked and tried to settle in. There was no TV, which I didn't mind. The bathroom door didn't close perfectly unless I pulled it hard. The mini fridge made a low humming sound that vibrated through the wooden floor. The bed squeaked when I pressed down on it. The entire place felt slightly unfinished, like someone built it fast then forgot about it. But nothing was outright wrong, not enough to call the host or complain. I stayed and got to work, trying to focus on my laptop screen. Around late afternoon, maybe 3 or 4, I started noticing small things that made me uncomfortable. At first, it was the feeling that the air never changed temperature, even though the sun moved and the outside should have cooled a bit. The air inside stayed warm and thick, like it wasn't circulating. Then I realized I could hear sounds outside, but not clearly, just soft pressure noises. Grass shifting, twigs cracking, something brushing lightly. I assumed it was squirrels or rabbits, but it felt like the sounds came too close to the guesthouse walls, like whatever it was moved right along the exterior. I shook it off and kept working, but my brain wouldn't ignore the strange atmosphere. I suddenly noticed how the walls didn't have any decorations, no frames, no shelves, no hooks. They looked blank, but not in a minimal design way. More like someone removed things and never replaced them. When I got up to stretch, I saw faint outlines on the wall like dust had gathered around shapes that once hung there. There were also a few thin scratches low to the wall near the floor, about the length of a finger but randomly spaced. It didn't look like normal wear or furniture marks. They looked intentional. By now the sun had lowered, but it was still daylight. I went outside to breathe fresh air and walked a few steps toward the yard. It was completely still. I looked at the main house, expecting maybe the host had arrived, but it was dark, no movement, no car sound, no front lights. I thought about messaging her to ask if she planned to stay at the main house that night, but I decided not to. Instead, I walked slowly around the guest house, curious to see where the outdoor sounds had come from. The grass was tall around the back wall, almost knee-height in some spots, and flattened in certain areas like someone or something had stood there repeatedly. I stopped moving when I saw something strange against the back wall. Faint marks in the dirt, spaced evenly, as if someone had been standing pressed close to the building for a long time. Not animal tracks, not shoe prints, more like repeated weight marks. I stared at them for a long time, feeling something cold inside me, but forced myself to go back in because there was nowhere else to go. Inside felt hotter now, even though the window was still open and afternoon light still stretched across the floor. The air smelled slightly different, sour, like old sweat or stale clothes. I checked the bathroom again and noticed the mirror had cloudy streaks. Not like fingerprints but smudges made by someone wiping with the palm of a hand. I hadn't used it yet. I looked at my luggage to make sure nothing had moved, and everything was still zipped shut and where I left it. But something felt wrong in a way that wasn't dramatic or loud. Felt invasive, silent, and hidden. I couldn't focus on my laptop anymore, so I sat on the bed and tried to calm myself by scrolling through my phone. But then I realized something that made me freeze. The listing photos didn't show the guesthouse bathroom mirror. They showed the sink, toilet, and shower curtain, but not the mirror. I remembered because I had checked if there was one before packing. Why leave it out unless something was wrong with it? The daylight dimmed quickly, turning yellowish-orange through the window. I decided I would stay only one night and leave early the next morning, even if I lost the money. I didn't feel safe. I didn't hear any clear noise. No voices, no footsteps, nothing obvious, but the entire environment felt watched. Not by ghosts, not by imagination, more like a human presence that wasn't visible but still there. I tried not to overthink, so I laid on the bed and listened carefully. After several minutes, I heard it again. The small cracking noise outside, slow and cautious. It wasn't like an animal that moves fast or random. It was rhythmical, like shifting weight, step by step, but controlled to avoid making sound. My body froze. I didn't move or breathe loudly, just stared at the ceiling, hoping it would stop. But it didn't stop. It moved from the side of the guest house toward the back, then silence again. I kept listening and heard the grass move like someone was lowering themselves slowly, not leaving, staying. I got up quietly and looked through the window without touching it. The backyard looked completely still, but I felt certain someone was out there watching, kneeling or laying low in the tall grass. I didn't see movement, but the feeling was undeniable, sharp and instinctive. My stomach had tightened and my mouth was dry. I didn't own any weapon, not even pepper spray. My phone battery was low, around 15%, and I didn't want to turn on the lights because that would expose me. I knew I had two choices: stay and risk it, or leave while it was still afternoon light fading into early evening. I didn't care about looking ridiculous or paranoid. Survival instinct matters more than ego. I quietly packed everything in under a minute, grabbed my keys, and didn't bother making the bed or closing drawers. I kept my footsteps soft and gentle, like I wanted the floor to forget I walked on it. When I reached the door, I took one deep breath and pushed it open. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt colder than before, and the yard felt heavier. I didn't look toward the tall grass because I knew if I saw something, I might freeze or make noise. I walked quickly but steadily, not running, because running signals fear and triggers pursuit. When I reached my car, I unlocked it as silently as I could, got in, locked the doors, and only then looked in the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought I saw something shift near the guesthouse corner. A small movement like someone raising their head slowly. I didn't stay to confirm. I started the car and backed out fast. When I reached the street, I finally exhaled and drove until my hands stopped shaking. I pulled over at a gas station and stared at the empty space around me, trying to understand what happened. Maybe someone used the guest house as a hiding spot. Maybe someone had a key. Maybe the host didn't tell the full truth. Whatever it was, my instincts knew I wasn't alone. I opened the Airbnb app and tried to report it, but after typing everything, the app froze and closed. When I reopened it, the listing was gone like it was never there. A few days later, I checked again from a different phone. Still gone. No trace. No reviews. No host name. Nothing. I don't tell this story to scare people with supernatural things. I tell it because sometimes danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides, listens, and waits. And the only warning you get is a feeling. And if you ever feel that feeling, leave. Don't wait for proof. Proof might come too late. The Airbnb looked like a decent place when I booked it. It was a renovated basement suite under a family home in a quiet neighborhood outside a small town. I only picked it because the hotels nearby were booked, and I needed somewhere for the week while I worked on a project. The listing said it had a private entrance, good Wi-Fi, and a little outdoor sitting area. Nothing fancy, just simple and cheap. When I arrived, the street felt almost too peaceful. The houses all looked the same, lined up in neat rows with trimmed hedges and clean driveways. The kind of place where neighbors probably knew everything about each other. The entrance to the basement suite was around the back of the main house, down a short set of concrete stairs. The door was plain white with a keypad lock and a small light above it. When I stepped inside, the air felt cooler than I expected, almost damp, like it hadn't been opened in a while. The space itself was small but clean. A little kitchen area with a tiny fridge, a living area with a simple couch and a small TV, and a bedroom with a queen-sized bed pushed against the wall. The place didn't smell bad, just a faint trace of old carpet and cleaning spray. I was tired from the drive, so I told myself everything was fine, even though something about the atmosphere felt a little heavy. The ceiling was low, and I could hear muffled footsteps from the family upstairs. Not loud, just soft thumps now and then. Felt normal enough. The first night went smoothly until around 3 a.m., when I woke up feeling strangely alert. The room was quiet, except for a faint mechanical hum coming from somewhere behind the wall. Maybe the heating system. I stayed still for a while, listening to the soft vibration running through the floor. Nothing else happened, so I eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, the hum was gone. I got ready, went to work, and returned in the early evening. When I walked inside, the air felt different, warmer, like someone had been in the space recently. The curtains over the small windows looked slightly uneven, as if they had been moved. I brushed it off. Maybe I had left them that way without noticing. I tried to settle in on the couch and watch something, but I kept noticing little things. A cabinet door in the kitchen was open a crack, even though I hadn't used it. My phone charger, which I was sure I had left on the table, was on the floor near the couch. My toothbrush was lying flat instead of leaning in the holder. All tiny things, nothing dramatic, but enough to make my stomach tighten a little. I tried telling myself maybe I was misremembering. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I had rushed in the morning and not paid attention. That night, I fell asleep quickly, but I kept waking up. Once because the AC unit kicked on loudly. Once because something upstairs made a heavy thud. And once because I heard a single sharp tapping noise inside the wall near the foot of my bed. Just one tap, quick and hollow. I lay there staring into the darkness, waiting for it to happen again. Didn't. The silence afterward felt thick, I stayed awake for almost an hour before sleep finally pulled me back under. On the third day, the situation changed from strange to concerning. I came back in the afternoon and immediately noticed that the bathroom light was on. I never leave lights on when I leave a place, especially a place I'm renting. When I stepped into the bathroom, the shower curtain was pulled halfway closed, even though I always kept it pushed to the side. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, feeling my heartbeat climb into my throat. I checked the door lock and keypad history, but the entry code only showed my own use. I tried to calm myself by thinking the owners upstairs maybe had a shared electrical panel or something that could turn the light on accidentally. Maybe the curtain had shifted from airflow. But deep down, I didn't believe those explanations. That night was the worst. I had trouble sleeping, so I lay on top of the covers scrolling on my phone. The air felt heavier than before, like the room was holding its breath. When I finally put the phone down and closed my eyes, I heard the humming sound again. The same low vibration I heard on the first night, but louder now and coming from the wall directly behind the bed. It wasn't a solid hum, but a kind of soft mechanical buzz that pulsed every few seconds. I tried to ignore it, but after 10 minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the bed a few inches away from the wall and crouched down on the floor. The carpet felt cold and slightly damp against my knee. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was there, faint but steady, mixed with something else. A soft shifting noise, like fabric rubbing lightly against wood. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't machinery. It was too irregular. As I listened, I suddenly felt a strong, distinct thump from the other side of the wall. Not loud, but unmistakable. A dull, heavy pressure hitting the drywall once. My whole body stiffened. For the next few seconds, I didn't hear anything. And then I heard breathing. Slow, controlled breathing, like someone was trying hard to keep it quiet. I moved away from the wall so fast I almost slipped. My hands were shaking. My legs felt unsteady. I grabbed my bag and stuffed my laptop inside without bothering to zip any pockets. I felt exposed standing there in the middle of the basement, like the walls themselves were watching me. I kept waiting for another sound, another thump, anything. The silence was worse. Before leaving, I did something stupid. I checked the vent near the ceiling. It was small, maybe 8 inches wide. The screws were old, except for one at the top that looked newer, cleaner, almost shiny. The metal around that screw had faint scrape marks, like someone had used a tool on it recently. I reached up and touched the vent cover. It moved slightly under my fingers, just a tiny shift. Not loose, but not fully secure either. That was enough. I left the basement quietly, locking the door behind me even though I didn't care at that point. My hands were trembling so badly that it took 3 tries to get the key into my car's ignition. I drove away with the windows down, just trying to breathe normally again. I didn't go far. I parked at a gas station on the edge of town, under bright lights, and sat there for almost an hour trying to calm down. My mind kept replaying the sound of that thump behind the wall. The breathing, the shifting, the strange warmth in the air when I came back earlier. The moved objects, the open cabinet, the damp carpet near the wall. Eventually, I called the non-emergency police line and told them what I experienced. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The sounds, the breathing, the bathroom light, the vent, the feeling that someone had been in the space without my knowledge. It felt strange to say it all out loud, but they didn't dismiss me. They took the address and said they'd send someone to check it out. I waited in my car for updates, feeling every minute stretch longer than it should. When the call finally came, the officer on the line spoke in a steady, careful tone. He said the property owners had allowed them inside. He said the basement had signs of recent tampering behind furniture, especially near the vents and wall panels. He said they found a crawl space opening behind the utility closet that looked recently disturbed. Dust swept aside, insulation pushed back, footprints in the narrow passageway. He said the passage connected to another access area beneath the stairs of the main house. He told me they didn't find anyone inside. The homeowners claimed they had no idea anyone could get into those spaces. They said they never used the basement and hadn't been down there in months. The officer said they were going to review security footage from the street, and ask neighbors about anyone seen around the property. When I asked what I should do, he simply said I made the right choice leaving. I didn't go back, not even to get the rest of my belongings. The Airbnb listing disappeared the next day. The owners said they were suspending the rental until they figured out the issue with the crawl space. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know anything more about what might have been behind that wall. Listening to me breathe at night, moving through tight passages, watching through vents, entering when I was gone. I stayed at a motel after that. A cheap one with thin walls and flickering hallway lights. But I slept better there than I ever could in that basement again. And now, whenever I stay anywhere new, hotel, rental, guest room, I check every vent, every panel, every crawl space door. I learned that some places don't need ghosts or monsters to be terrifying. Sometimes, the worst thing in the house is a real person who knows how to move quietly, hide in small spaces, and wait for the right moment. And the most unsettling part is that whoever was in the walls of that Airbnb slipped away without anyone ever seeing him. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the hiking trail I wanted to explore that weekend. It was a small guest house attached to the back of someone's property, sitting at the edge of a quiet town. The photos showed a simple wooden cabin, with a little porch and a single light over the door. It looked peaceful, maybe a bit too plain, but it had good reviews and I didn't plan on spending much time inside anyway. I drove there late Friday afternoon. The directions took me up a narrow, cracked road that wound up a hill lined with tall, dry grass. There weren't many houses nearby, just long stretches of open land and a few scattered trees that looked half dead from the sun. When I pulled up, the main house looked old but clean. The guest house sat behind it, down a small dirt path. It was smaller than I expected. The paint on the wood was chipped, and the screen door hung crooked, banging lightly every time the wind picked up. Still, it looked decent enough. I parked beside it, took my backpack, and went inside. The inside smelled faintly of cleaning spray, but underneath that was something else, kind of like old damp wood. The space was small. One room with a bed, a small kitchen counter, and a bathroom through a narrow door. Everything was basic, but fine. There was no TV, no Wi-Fi, just a lamp by the bed and a tiny window that looked out toward a line of trees in the distance. I unpacked a bit, ate something I'd brought, and decided to take a short walk before dark. The host's property stretched far behind the house, mostly open fields that sloped down into a line of trees. I walked down a dirt path that led to what looked like an old barn, but I didn't go close. Something about it felt wrong, not in a horror movie way, just private, like I wasn't supposed to be there. When I came back, it was getting dark. I noticed that the main house had no lights on. It looked empty. That didn't seem strange at first. Maybe the owners were out. But when I realized there wasn't a single car parked in front, I wondered if they were even home. The listing had said the hosts lived on site, but I didn't see or hear anyone. I locked the door and settled in for the night. At around midnight, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to pull me out of sleep. Something like a light thump, followed by a dragging noise. I lay still, listening. It sounded like it came from outside, near the back of the cabin. I told myself it could have been an animal. The place was surrounded by fields. It made sense there'd be wildlife. But then it happened again, thump, drag, then silence. I sat up slowly, straining to hear. The sound was faint, but steady, like someone moving something heavy over dirt. I didn't want to look out the window, but the curiosity got the better of me. I turned off the lamp so I wouldn't be visible and walked over quietly. The glass was dirty, and the moonlight made it hard to see clearly, but I could make out movement near the barn. A faint shadow, someone or something was out there. It looked like a person, crouched or bent over, dragging something across the ground. My stomach tightened. It was late. Why would anyone be working outside now? I stepped back and told myself it wasn't my problem. Probably a neighbor. Probably nothing. I got back in bed, trying to ignore the sound, but it came and went all night. I barely slept. The next morning, I looked outside again. The field looked normal. No one was around, no sign of what I thought I saw. I felt silly about it. Maybe I'd imagined it. I made coffee and decided to go for my hike early, just to get away for a while. The trail was beautiful, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling all day. When I came back that evening, I noticed fresh tire marks in the dirt near the guest house. The strange thing was, my car was parked right beside them, meaning someone had driven close to the cabin while I was gone. I checked my door. It was still locked, but the handle felt oily, like someone's hands had been on it recently. I felt that prickly, alert feeling you get when you know something's off but can't prove it. I kept the lights on that night. I didn't sleep much. Every little noise made me jump. The wind outside, the creaks in the wood, the occasional scrape of a branch against the wall. It all felt amplified in that quiet space. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate ones, crunching on the gravel path that led to my door. My chest tightened. I froze. The steps stopped just outside. Then, the screen door creaked. The metal handle rattled, softly, like someone testing if it was locked. I held my breath. I didn't move. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. Then came faint, retreating steps. I waited another 10 minutes before moving, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. There was no signal. I checked again and again, but it stayed on no service. The only thing I could think to do was sit in the corner with the lamp off and wait for daylight. When morning came, I went outside carefully. There were footprints in the dirt by the door. Big ones, definitely a man's shoes. I followed them a few feet before they disappeared into the dry grass, leading toward the barn. I decided I was done. I packed up my things fast and loaded the car. Before leaving, I figured I should at least let the host know what happened. I walked up to the main house and knocked, but no one answered. I tried again. Nothing. The curtains were drawn, but when I looked closer, I realized something. There was dust on the windowsills and a spiderweb across the corner of the doorframe, the kind that builds up over weeks. The house wasn't occupied. That realization made my stomach drop. If the hosts didn't live there, who had been outside my cabin at night? I didn't wait to find out. I got in the car and drove down that cracked road as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the town below, where I finally got a phone signal. I called Airbnb and told them everything about the noise, the footsteps, the empty main house, the footprints. The support person sounded polite but detached, like they'd heard it all before. They said they'd look into it and issue a refund. A few days later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone, completely removed. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't, because the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Someone had gone out there at night, checking doors, dragging something heavy near the barn. And if the host's house was empty, that meant whoever was out there had free access to the property. Maybe had been living nearby, maybe even inside that barn. I sometimes think about what would have happened if I hadn't locked the door, if I'd been too tired or too trusting. I keep seeing those footprints in my head, the way they led straight from my porch to that dark, empty barn. It's been months since then, but I still don't book Airbnbs unless the hosts are verified and living on the property. I double-check addresses now, zoom in on satellite maps, read every bad review, even the ones most people ignore. Because sometimes you think you're staying on someone's property, but it's not their property anymore, and the person walking outside your door at night isn't there by mistake. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a break from work and noise. I wanted a quiet place for 3 nights, somewhere away from traffic and people. The listing showed a small cabin outside a rural town, with a big yard and a view of trees stretching all the way to the horizon. The pictures made it look calm, simple, and private. The reviews said it was clean and peaceful. That was all I cared about. The drive there took longer than I expected. The last part of the road wasn't paved. It was just dirt and small rocks that made my car shake the entire time. The cabin sat alone on a wide piece of land, far from any neighbors. The yard was mostly dry grass and patches of dirt. There was a small deck in front, a rusty metal chair beside the door, and a single porch light that flickered even in daylight. It looked older than the photos, but still fine. When I walked inside, the air felt cooler than outside but smelled slightly damp, like the place hadn't been opened in a while. There was a living area with an old couch, a tiny kitchen with mismatched cabinets, and a hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked lived in but clean enough. I noticed a locked door at the end of the hall. It had a heavy metal latch on it, the kind you'd see on a basement or storage room. The listing didn't mention it, but lots of rentals had locked supply rooms. I didn't think much of it. The first day was simple. I unpacked, ate a small dinner, and walked around the yard. The nearest house was far away, almost a tiny dot through the trees. There were no sounds except wind in the grass and the occasional creak from the old wooden deck. Felt peaceful at first, but also empty in a strange way. I kept glancing back at the cabin every few minutes, like I was worried something inside might move while I wasn't looking. When the sun went down, the place changed. The cabin felt smaller in the dark, and the quiet felt heavier. I could hear every tiny sound. The wood settling, the fridge humming, the wind brushing against the siding. I told myself it was normal. Rural places always sounded different at night. I went to bed early. Around midnight, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the silence. It sounded like something metal shifting or scraping. I lay there, listening. The sound happened again, softer the second time. I stayed still, trying to figure out where it came from. I thought maybe it was outside, maybe the old porch chair or something hitting the wall. Then it happened a third time, and this time it felt closer. Came from inside the cabin, deep inside the hallway. I sat up slowly. My heart started pounding, but I stayed quiet. The room was completely dark except for the faint moonlight coming through the curtains. I didn't want to turn on any lights. I just listened. The noise came again, and this time I recognized it. It was the sound of a heavy latch moving slightly, almost like it was being tested from the other side. The locked door. I waited. The sound didn't continue. After a long minute, everything went silent again. I told myself the metal latch was loose and shifting because of the wind or the house settling. I forced myself to believe it. It took me a long time to fall back asleep. In the morning, the cabin looked harmless again. Sunlight made everything feel normal. I walked to the hallway. I looked at the locked door. The latch hung in the same place. I checked it with my hand. It wobbled a little, but not enough to move on its own. That bothered me, so I stepped away from it quickly. I didn't want to imagine someone on the other side. I spent the day outside exploring the area. I walked down a dirt path behind the cabin that led into a thick line of trees. There were no birds chirping, no animals moving, nothing. Felt too quiet. Even the air felt still. After a while, the silence got to me, and I headed back. When I got to the cabin, something was off. The porch chair wasn't in the same place. It had been pushed slightly away from the wall. I tried to remember if I brushed against it earlier, but I was sure I hadn't touched it. I checked the door. It was still locked, but the metal handle felt warm, like someone had held it not long ago. The rest of the day I tried to distract myself, but I kept looking down the hallway at that locked basement door. Every time I walked past it, I felt a small cold pressure in my chest, like the air around it was different from the rest of the cabin. That night, the noises returned. They started after midnight again. A faint metal scrape, a soft thump, then complete silence. I lay there holding still, listening harder than I ever had in my life. I waited for the next sound, and it came slowly, like someone didn't want me to hear it. A quiet, dragging noise, something heavy moving across a floor. I felt a wave of fear that made my whole body tense. My first thought was that maybe the locked room wasn't empty. Maybe someone had been using it without the host mentioning it. Maybe the space under the cabin connected to something else. Another entrance, another property, something no one had mentioned on the listing. My brain kept coming up with reasons that didn't help me feel any better. At some point, the sounds stopped. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I checked the door again. The latch was slightly lower than before, almost like it had been pulled down then pushed back up. It wasn't where I remembered it. I felt my stomach get tight. I backed away from the door and stayed as far from the hallway as I could. I sat outside most of the day just to avoid being inside with that locked door. I kept staring at the cabin windows, half expecting to see something move behind the glass. Around late afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I planned to leave early the next morning before sunrise. I packed most of my things but left a few items out so it wouldn't look like I was rushing out in panic. I tried to act normal even though I was alone. I ate early and sat on the couch, pretending to be calm. When it got dark, I left the hallway light on. I didn't want that end of the cabin to be completely black. I sat awake for hours listening. Everything was quiet until around 1:30 a.m. when I heard the softest sound yet. Not metal this time, not dragging. Just the sound of a slow step on the floor, somewhere beyond the locked door. A single footstep, then another. The steps moved closer to the door from the other side, stopping directly behind it. I could almost imagine a person standing there, listening for movement in the cabin just like I was listening for movement from behind the door. Then the latch moved. Not a full shake, not a full pull. Just a slight lift, like fingers were pressing against it slowly, testing it again. That was it for me. I didn't wait for anything else. I turned off the lights, grabbed my bag, and left the cabin quietly. I didn't even put my shoes on correctly. I walked fast across the yard to my car and got in without looking back. The engine sounded loud in the dark, but I didn't care. I drove down that dirt road with my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest gas station 20 minutes away. The bright lights felt unreal after all that darkness. I sat there breathing hard, trying to calm myself down. My mind kept replaying the sound of the slow footsteps behind that door. I never went back for the leftover things I left on the counter. I didn't want to get anywhere near that place again. Later, when I checked the listing to report the problem, it was already gone, completely taken down. No contact number, no listing history, nothing. It was like it had never existed. I even searched the address on maps. The satellite view showed the cabin and the property, but when I checked street images, they were blurred out or outdated. To this day, I have no idea what was behind that door. Maybe it was someone living there without the owner knowing. Maybe the place wasn't even owned by the person who listed it. Maybe the basement wasn't a basement at all, but an entrance to something deeper underground, something someone didn't want anyone to find. All I know is that someone was on the other side of that locked door for at least 2 nights, standing in a space I thought was empty, moving around slowly in the dark, testing the latch every time the cabin got quiet. And if that latch had been even a little weaker, I don't think I would have made it out of there before whatever was behind it decided to come through. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the town where I had a job interview. I didn't want to spend money on a hotel, and the photos made the place look quiet and harmless. Just a small studio apartment attached to the side of an old house. The listing said, private entrance, quiet neighborhood, and self-check-in. That was enough for me. The place was farther out than I expected. The road leading to it turned from asphalt to gravel, then from gravel to dirt. My car kept shaking over potholes and deep tire tracks. There were no streetlights, just empty land on both sides, wide fields of brown grass that moved slowly in the wind. The house finally came into view at the end of the road, sitting by itself without any neighbors around. The siding was faded, the roof looked uneven in places, and the windows were dark even though it was only late afternoon. The studio apartment was attached to the right side of the house, like it had been added later. It had its own door and a tiny wooden step that creaked when I tested it with my foot. The lockbox was old and rusted around the edges. When I opened the door, the air smelled faintly like dust and old carpet. Not terrible, just stale, like the place hadn't been aired out in a long time. Inside, everything looked a little older than the photos. The curtains were thin and yellowish. The bedspread had faded colors. The small kitchenette had a mini fridge with a dent in the door, and the microwave looked like it belonged in the early 2000s. The bathroom was tiny: shower, toilet, sink, nothing else. The only window in the entire studio faced the backyard, which was just tall grass and a leaning wooden shed that looked like it would fall if the wind got strong enough. There was something else too, a door on the left wall. It was locked with a big silver padlock. The listing hadn't mentioned any locked doors, but I figured it was a storage room used by the host. Still, the lock was big, newer than everything else in the room, and bolted into a frame that didn't match the rest of the wall. It felt out of place. I ignored it for the moment. I unpacked, sat on the bed, and tried to relax. The room was quiet. Too quiet. No cars, no voices, no dogs barking. Just the faint hum of the fridge and an occasional tap from somewhere in the walls, probably temperature changes or old pipes. I ate a small dinner, set an alarm for the morning, and went to bed early. I left the lamp on because the darkness in that place felt heavier than normal darkness. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up suddenly. My eyes opened fast, like my body sensed something even before my mind caught up. At first I thought it was just the stress of traveling, but then I heard a noise. A small noise, quiet but sharp. Metal clicking, coming from the locked door. I held still, staring at it. The padlock hung there motionless, but the sound had definitely come from that direction. A soft metal shift, like something moved behind the door. I listened harder, barely breathing. Then came a second sound. A slow, dull thud from inside the wall behind the door. Not loud, just heavy enough to feel wrong. I stayed frozen for at least half an hour, waiting for another sound. Nothing happened. Eventually, the silence felt so complete that I convinced myself it could have been the pipes or the fridge cycling. I turned on the second lamp, just to make the room brighter, and forced myself to fall asleep sitting up. In the morning, everything looked normal. The padlock hadn't moved. The room was bright and harmless again. I tried to shake off the fear and focus on my interview. I left the studio early and didn't come back until late afternoon. When I returned, I noticed something immediately. The curtain by the window had been moved. Not wide open or anything dramatic, just pushed slightly to the side. I froze in the doorway. I had left it closed. I remembered closing it firmly because I didn't want anyone seeing inside at night. I checked the window latch. It was still locked. The whole place had been locked the whole time I was gone. My hands shook a little as I pulled the curtain fully closed again. I told myself maybe I brushed it earlier and didn't notice. I didn't believe that, but I pretended to. That evening, the silence felt worse. The air felt heavier, like it wasn't moving. Even the fridge sounded quieter. I kept glancing at the locked door on the wall. That big padlock caught the light and reflected it in small, sharp glints. Around dinner time, I heard something faint. The softest sound of a slow scrape from behind the wall, like something lightly brushing against it. It stopped quickly, but it was enough to raise every hair on my arms. I decided I wasn't sleeping well that night. I kept the lights on and sat on the bed with my back to the wall opposite the locked door. I watched that door for a long time until my eyes burned. At some point, I drifted into a light sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to a sound that made my whole body jolt. A loud, sudden bang against the locked door. It was heavy, direct, and close. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I stared at the door, not moving. My breathing turned shallow. I tried to listen for other sounds, but my heartbeat was so loud in my ears it drowned everything. Then I heard breathing, not mine. A slow, deep breath coming through the tiny gap at the bottom of the locked door. The kind of sound a person makes when they lean close to something. I felt like I was going to faint from fear. I sat perfectly still for what felt like forever. Eventually, the breathing stopped. The silence returned. I stayed awake until the sky outside turned gray with morning light. When it was bright enough to see clearly, I grabbed my bag and packed everything fast. I wanted to leave immediately, but part of me needed to know if I had imagined the sound. I walked to the locked door slowly, each step feeling heavier. The padlock was hanging slightly twisted, not open, but turned in a way it hadn't been before, as if someone inside had pushed hard against the door. On the floor beneath the door was a thin line of dust that had been disturbed. A small, narrow smudge where something had dragged or pressed through the gap. That was all I needed. I grabbed my keys, opened the front door, and stepped outside as fast as I could without running. The cold air hit me hard, but I felt an instant sense of relief being out of that room. I didn't look back until I got to my car. When I finally looked, I saw something that stayed with me forever. The curtain, the one I had pulled shut just an hour ago, was open again. Just enough for someone inside to look out. I got in my car and drove away without checking out, without cleaning up, without caring about any extra charges. I didn't even stop until I reached the main road near town. Later that day, after my nerves settled a little, I opened Airbnb to report the listing. It was gone, completely removed. No host, no address, no booking history. My reservation still existed in my account, but the listing itself had been erased. I searched the address online later out of curiosity. The main house showed up, but the studio on the side did not. It didn't appear on any property maps or rental records. It was like that room wasn't supposed to exist. I still don't know who or what was behind that locked door, but I know it wasn't pipes or animals. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was behind that door, testing the padlock, pushing against it, breathing through the gap, waiting in a room no guest was ever supposed to know about. And that curtain moving by itself, that meant someone stepped into the studio while I was gone. Someone on the inside. The padlock kept me safe that night. If it had been older, weaker, or not fully latched, I don't think I would have walked out of that place at all.